Okay, hello everyone. This is going to be the recording for lecture 2. Hope everyone's first week is going well. I understand there's been some Zoom issues for folks doing a lot of live interaction. Hope everything's going well. I know my camera is very dim, so let me just go ahead and jump into screen share so we're not looking at that. Okay. So anyway, hope your week's going well. Just a few announcements, and I'll try to do this in these recordings as much as possible, just so that we can all remain on the same page. There are a few notable updates I've made to Canvas, and some of them have been there for a while. Others of them are just now. First of all, and a few of you have already noticed this, is that there is actually a discussions tab under the book report module that asks you to choose your book along with the author. There's no specific due date I've attached to that. Remember, the book report that I've assigned to you for the purposes of this class is supposed to be that long-term, higher stakes assignment that I will not ask a lot of updates on week to week, although I'm still available if you want to talk about it and look at drafts and so forth. But I'd recommend you, well, first of all, please do go ahead and choose your book as soon as you're able, and use that discussion tab to put in your book name and the author. I'll let you know if it's somehow not suitable for the class, although that's never happened in my 3 years here. So anyway, do that, and I really recommend that you go ahead and get started on that as soon as you're able, reading your book, and begin to think about how you might reflect back on that for the purposes of the book report, because as we discussed, I really don't want it to be like a sterile type busy work assignment. I would like it to be something that reflects a carefully thought out, position on the book, even if you disagree. Disagreements are really fun. Anyway, I digress. Let me know if you have any questions regarding the book report. Next thing is, there are 3 things that are due on Monday, this upcoming Monday. 2 of them we've already talked about. One of them you're probably already aware of. The first is, it's not really an assignment, it's a get to know you exercise, very simple set of questions that if you would like to let me know anything regarding your life situation that would be helpful for me to know, please go ahead and fill that out. I think I threw 5 extra credit points your way for doing that. So I guess you don't have to do it, but why wouldn't you? You don't have to say anything that reveals anything personal, but whatever you're comfortable with. The second thing, and you should know this, is the first lab notebook assignment. That is under the biology lab notebook module. There's a fairly lengthy recording there that discusses, what the biology lab notebook is, and at the very end outlines what the assignment for this week is. And so that is also due back to Canvas on Monday. Basically, I'll just rehash it. The assignment is to spend 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even more than that if you get into it, but at least 45 minutes to an hour, journaling on a specific organism of your choice, whether it be a pet at home or a plant in your backyard or an insect. As long as it's an organism, as long as it's alive, journal on it for up to an hour. Again, maybe more, using the outline, the principles that are discussed in that lecture recording, in that Zoom recording. So the ABC 1, 2, 3, following the format for the headings on each page, table of contents, all that stuff. This is really just to get you started on your lab notebook, okay? So that is due, the very first assignment is due on Monday as a PDF scan. I showed you an app that you can get for free on your device called Adobe Scan that you can just take, literally just take pictures of your lab notebook and then convert that directly into a PDF. Super simple to use and it's free. Better than a picture. Like if you just use your camera app on your phone, I recommend really using the Adobe Scan app so you can get a PDF. Super simple. I didn't mention this, but you can also use, like if you have a conventional scanner at home, I know not everyone does, but if you do, and if that's what you prefer, totally fine. I'm not going to be able to tell the difference. In fact, the conventional scanner might even do a better job. But whatever suits you, as long as it's a PDF scan of that assignment, of that lab week, totally fine with me. The last thing in terms of assignments is quiz 1, which I just made live a few minutes ago. And you're going to want to watch this recording before taking that quiz because it covers the material that's in this recording. So that quiz, it's 10 questions, a combination of multiple choice, fill in the blank, true, false type questions. Then it covers the first lecture, the first lab, and then this recording. Okay, so that's going to be due on Monday as well. So those are the 3 things you have on your docket. A couple other things. You know, as I mentioned, and you may have more experience than this at this point, but I've heard, you know, I've heard through the grapevine that Zoom has been acting strange, probably because of the massive uptake in usage over the past week, to be expected, I suppose. And so I've noticed that with Zoom links, like the recordings, the recording that I posted under the lab session, for example, when I click on it under Canvas, it doesn't seem to work for me. Maybe if it's working for you, great. If it's not working for you, I resent it in an email, okay? So you should be able to get it. Click on the link. My recommendation is that you download those just in case there's some kind of weird Zoom issue if this keeps happening, that you can download the files directly, whether audio or video or text or whatever. You have the option of doing that. Anyway, please let me know if the recording links aren't working. There are some instances where I directly upload an MP4 to Canvas. If it lets me, sometimes it doesn't, so I post the link. And let me know if the links for some reason aren't working. But you should have the links at this point for the first lecture and the lab. And finally, and this is one thing I just want to point out, this recurring Zoom session that I'm on right now, it's under the lecture module of the Canvas page. It's open for anyone. I mean, I don't have to be present. And so in theory, you can use this same link for a class study session that I don't need to be on. I mentioned this because a couple of folks have mentioned it would be nice to have study sessions. And so I want to say, feel free to use it. Feel free to use this link to study with one another live. We're going to have, live study sessions where I can answer any questions, but then I can sign off and folks can keep talking, and you can meet on here anytime you want. It should be accessible for, I don't need to be present. And so you can plan that way by using the discussion under discussions module. I think I put a discussions a little link right there that you can use to post questions or comments or ideas to the whole class. If someone wants to take it upon themselves to suggest, hey, how about next Monday for a study session at 2 p.m. or whatever, and then folks can put their feedback on, feel free to do that. I won't monitor the discussion page. unless I will monitor the questions and answers page, but I won't monitor the discussion page. That's for you. If you want to go ahead and use that as a forum for, working those types of things, doing Zoom study sessions, I want to say that, great. The more live interaction, the better. Okay. And I know we're not live right here. No, it's just me for the purposes of this recording right now. I put out the notice fairly, I decided to do this tonight. So I know there's no one here to ask any questions, but if you have any questions, continue to email me or feel free to use the questions module under that specific part of the Canvas. Anyway, that's it for announcements. Today, I guess this evening, I'm recording this on Wednesday evening. That reminds me, regarding these recordings, I know I'm going to always post these recordings on Canvas. If anyone wants to join in for live, I really encourage that. You don't have to, because it's not what's required in the course for this online flexible modality. But if, I've already had a couple folks join me for a few various things. If you want to join me live, I appreciate the company. Maybe you appreciate the company. I'm thinking right now, I'm probably going to be doing them on Monday and Wednesday evenings around 8:30. Maybe sometimes I'll do them over the weekend, but generally speaking, I think I'll do the recordings on Mondays and Wednesdays and then post them immediately afterwards. And so if you want to keep those slot times open, if you're available during those times, there's a good chance I'll be on this Zoom link recording the lecture, in that time frame. So am I recording? I just want to make sure. Anyway, yes, I'm still recording. So anyway, that's just something for thought. Anyway, today I'm going to have a brief recap of lecture 1, just a couple of recap questions. I kept these slides, as a relic of the old face-to-face, lecture style, and I hope we can get back to that eventually of meeting in a classroom and having face-to-face interaction. But these are my old slides for that purpose, where I could actually posit a question to the class and then get live answers back face-to-face. And so I just kept those. I know no one's here to answer them, but I'll just go ahead and I'll ask the question to myself and then pretend to answer, I suppose. And then, so anyway, we'll have a brief recap session, and then I'll just go ahead and do lecture for today. A shorter lecture, so it won't be as long because I know I've already probably chatted at you enough for the first week. Anyway, so recap from the first lecture session, which was an overview of the scientific method in biology. So question 1 is, which is not a property of life? And remember, we had a slide where we discussed these 7 properties of life, broadly speaking. Which one is not a property of life? Is order a property of life? I would say yes. Is energy processing a property of life? Yes. Is aging a process of life? Yeah, well, maybe. Growth and development? It seems so. I would say aging. It's not on the list, but that's maybe a little bit of a confusing question. Of course, all living things age, but it's not something that I posited to you as a uniform property of life. And I'll get into what I mean by this a little bit later on in the course. Broadly, though, not everything ages at the same rate. And I'll point out some notable examples, especially when we get to evolution. Anyway, these other 3 are properties of life. This one is a little bit more iffy. So question 2, a hypothesis is a what? Well, it is A, a question about some observed phenomenon, B, an explanation of what might be happening, C, a hypothesis project, or D, an observation from an experiment. These are kind of laying out some various steps of the scientific method, but I'll go ahead and posit that a hypothesis is an explanation of what might be going on. So in the context of the scientific method, we start out with an observation. On the basis of that observation, you ask a question, and you try to answer that question preemptively with a hypothesis. And so you're walking through a field, and you observe a couple of snakes that look pretty similar, but they're not exactly similar. You have a question. Why are these snakes so similar? And you hypothesize, let's say I hypothesize, one is mimicking the other. Okay, so my hypothesis that one snake is mimicking the other snake is a proposed explanation. Okay, it's an educated guess, for lack of a better term. Not necessarily what's happening fundamentally, it's just a proposed explanation for what might be happening. Okay. A prediction, going one step further, is an assumption that if the hypothesis is true, then something will happen. Okay. And I just went ahead and went through that. So it's a statement of what will happen if the hypothesis is true. And various disciplines use hypothesis in a variety of different formats. The one that I like to use, the one that's most clean, the one that I'm positing to you is the correct answer, is an if-then statement. If the hypothesis is true, then this thing will happen. Okay, so it's one step further after the hypothesis. Question 4, which is the independent variable? Remember, in the context of an experiment, which is what you do after you make a prediction, if you're doing an experiment, you delineate between the things that you're controlling and the things that happen as a result of your control. Okay, so the independent variable is the thing that you do not control. When the dependent I got them mixed up. The independent variable is what you control. The dependent variable is what happens as a result of that. So going back to, and I'm not even talking about these things here, but going back to that example we used in the last lecture where we had the variety of snake species out in an exclosure that were all put out, and then we released red-tailed hawks to go predate on them. The independent variable was what we chose, meaning the different species of snakes. We chose those snakes and we put them in that enclosure. The dependent variable is what happens as a result of that, the thing that we don't control, which is the rate at which the red-tailed hawk predates on the different species. Okay, so it's what's the independent variable in this case? Well, right here it's the chosen wavelength of light. It's the thing that this can be any different experiment. It's the thing that you actually choose. It's not what happens in response to something that you choose. And we'll go through lots of examples of this, especially in the lab notebook. I'll ask you to devise your own experiments in the lab notebook. And I think this is the last question. What was our conclusion from that experiment that we talked about in lecture? That was an actual experiment, by the way, broadly speaking. We concluded that king snakes, coral snakes. These are these two snake species that seem to look like one another. We concluded that king snakes, right here, mimic coral snakes. Remember, the coral snake generally occurs on the East Coast, Midwest a little bit, is a venomous snake. King snake is not, but the king snake derives protection from mimicking the coral snake because it is a dangerous pattern, and things might see that pattern and go, oh, I don't want to touch it, it's dangerous, even though it's really not. It's a mimic. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and delve into the very first unit of the course. Okay, so we broke the course down by 3 units. Let's start with the very first unit, which is going to be ecology. Ecology, which is where my bread and butter is. I'm primarily an ecologist. I'm a biologist, but specifically, I'm an ecologist. Even more specifically, I'm a botanist. But anyway, I digress. Let's start with ecology. Okay, and so today, in this first lecture in ecology, I'm just going to introduce the subject and lay out some broad examples and ideas and so forth. And for those of you who are following along with this in the textbook, this is in chapter 19 of the 6th edition, pages 403 to 411. So if you do have the textbook, feel free to read the corresponding information. All right, it's hot, I got a drink. So what is ecology? Just like biology is the study of life, anything that has ology at the end of it is the study of something. So if we break it down, ecology literally comes from well, part Greek, part Latin, oikos, which is the Greek word for house, and ology, which of course is the root for the study of. So literally speaking, and if you literally say what ecology stands for, it's the study of the house. Okay, but we're not architects here. We're not planning engineers or anything like that. So we're not, when we say the study of the house, we don't literally mean something like this, right? We're not studying houses. So that's what it literally means, but in terms of the real definition of ecology, it's the study of how organisms relate to each other and their environment. And so relating to each other, that's one organism relating to another across various scales. That's something called biotic interaction, bio meaning living interactions, organisms relating to one another. But then the other component is organisms relating to their environment. So organisms relating to the habitat they use, the water, the soil, the temperature, and so forth. And so those are abiotic, not living components. So ecology is a complex, a very complex science. When I took microbiology as an undergraduate, I had a microbiology professor who kind of condescendingly said that ecology is the study of the obvious. Since you're just looking at things at the macro level, you're counting plants, you're counting animals, and you're making these really broad generalizations and statistics that you can just say without even doing a study, in his view. That's not really the case. Okay, ecology is literally the most complicated biological science there is. Okay, because it builds on everything else beneath it. You know, and we're going to talk about the various levels of biology as the course goes on. By starting with ecology, I think this is a good place to start because we're talking about things that we can see with our eyes, we can relate to individual organisms and groups of organisms. Okay, and you've probably, you know, been to a national park before, you've walked through a grassy field, you've heard the insects buzzing, you've seen birds eating bugs, and you know, you've already kind of got a broad idea about what ecology is, right? So I think it's a good place to start. However, those types of things, those interactions depend on, they rest on top of all the other tiers of biology which we're going to talk about in other units. It depends on biochemistry, genetic interactions, you know, homeostasis, cellular interactions. I mean, all those things are components of ecology, and so you can bisect, you know, and I'm going through across this chart. You can bisect various parts of ecology and really, you know, point in aspects of genetics, aspects of microbiology, aspects of you name it, it's there, aspects of chemistry. So it's a really complex field if you think about it in those terms. And in terms of the discipline itself of ecology, it's broken into increasingly complex levels. And throughout this unit, we're going to explore these various levels. We're really going to gloss over organismal ecology, which is the study of the individual organism. That's fairly self-evident. We'll talk about some things, but we're going to start mostly here at this tier, population ecology, and build upward. Okay, and just as a reminder, you've actually seen this same schematic before. It was in the first lecture. This is the same schematic that we're going to be using throughout the course to sort of guide our exploration of the field of biology. Okay, so, you know, in a typical biology class, you might start here at the atomic level and then start to build molecules and then start to build macromolecules and organelles and cells and tissues and organs and organisms, and then you work your way up to this level. Okay, I'm kind of flipping it on its head. I like to start right here, you know, in ecology, because it's relatable. It's what my discipline is personally as an ecologist. But I also just want to emphasize that all of these things depend on everything beneath it. So that's what makes ecology more complicated than all this, because, you know, two atoms interacting with each other. I know that there's a lot of complexity there for any physicist-oriented people that are out there, but you know, if you break it up all the way to the highest possible tier of ecology, literally the ecology of the whole world, the biosphere, there's clearly atomic interactions going on there that influence things as wide as our climate. Okay, and so ecology, I'm probably, you know, preaching to the choir a little bit at this point. Hopefully I've convinced you that ecology is a complex discipline. So I'm going to start here again with population ecology. And the reason why is that it includes aspects of organismal ecology. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this tier of population ecology, okay? And I'm going to posit to you that, you know, population is one of those colloquial terms that people talk about all the time. We use it in our common vernacular, don't we? You know, this population is disproportionately affected. The population of Bakersfield College, the population of Bakersfield, this city has such and such a population, right? In terms of biology and specifically ecology, we use the term population, but we have a different meaning for it. Okay, so try to get out of your head anything that you've heard in terms of what like demographers use, like people demographers use in the word population. We're going to define it a little bit differently here for the purposes of ecology. So an ecological population has three components to it, okay? It's a group of individuals, okay? So it's a group of organisms of the same species in the same place at the same time, okay? So in order for an ecological population to exist, it has to be of the same species, it has to be at the same place, and it has to be at the same time. And so if an eagle and a lizard were interacting together, is that a population? No, right? Because they're not the same species, right? In the same place. What about gazelles in, let me use a tiger example. What about tigers in the tropical forests of India? Okay. And then separated by thousands of miles, another group of tigers in the Arctic boreal forests of Russia. Okay, separated by thousands of miles, no real access to one another. Okay, even though they're both tigers, the same species, are those two members of the same population? No, they're not in the same place. Okay, so a population has to be of the same species in the same place. And lastly, it has to be at the same time. Okay, so think of an island. Okay, if any of you have ever been to the Channel Islands off the coast of California, for example, Catalina is a good example. Think about an island where a group of elephants live. Okay, and actually there were pygmy mammoths on the Channel Islands at one point. Kind of a cool story. I digress. A group of elephants on an island that are living there, they're the same species and they're in the same place, obviously they're on the island, but then a volcano erupts and kills all of the elephants on the island. A bit of a violent example, but you know, all the elephants are now dead. Okay, but then 1,000 years later, elephants from the mainland that are of the same species swim onto the island and make their new home there. Are the elephants that were killed before the volcanic eruption the same population as the elephants that just swam there 1,000 years later from the mainland? No, even though they're the same species, even though it's the same place, the island, it's not at the same time. Okay, so a population is three things: the same species, the same place, the same time. Okay, so the, a population, same species, same place, same time, they rely on the same resources, they're influenced by the same factors like volcanic eruptions, and they interact and breed with one another. Okay, so that's a population. It's a distinct unit. Okay, and the field of population ecology is what population ecologists actually study. And population ecologists, I consider myself a population ecologist, amongst other things. We're concerned with a variety of things, but broadly, there's two things that we look at. We look at demography, so age structure of a population, what's the proportion of old individuals to young individuals, mortality rate, how quickly do individuals die, how long do they live, etc., and density. And so which is the number of individuals in that population relative to the amount of space that they have. These are the types of questions that population ecologists ask, mostly for the sake of understanding how that population functions. And it's important to understand how a population functions because from a conservation perspective, again, coming from the conservation field myself, if you don't understand how a population functions, you don't really understand how you can manage it effectively. And so I'll note two notable examples here. I told you I would use examples from Tejon Ranch. One is, maybe you've never seen these before. Would you guess that this is like sub-Saharan Africa? Like on the prairie, like Lion King? Well, no, these are actually pronghorn antelope from Tejon Ranch. They're right here in California. We've got a herd of about 30. The herd fluctuates from about 30 to 40 individuals. Right now it's about 37. And so these are a native species right here to, a very common Great American Plain species. They're not really an antelope, but people call them pronghorn antelope. But that 30-something individual group on Tejon Ranch, there aren't any pronghorn anywhere near there, other than I think the closest other group is on the Carrizo Plain, which is closer to Bakersfield, to the west of us. The herd on Tejon Ranch is functionally a population, and we know exactly how many individuals there are. There's 37 as of last fall. Actually, I think there's a few more now. There were 7 fawns this year. So sometimes population ecologists know exactly how many individuals they're dealing with in a population because you can literally count them, all right? The pronghorn on Tejon Ranch, another good example. Another good example are California condors. Maybe you've heard of California condors before. I'll use a lot of condor examples, but just to broadly tell their story, it's the largest bird species in the Western Hemisphere. It's got a wingspan of 14 feet, in excess of 14 feet sometimes. So that's like 2 times my arm length. These are big birds. In the 1970s, these critters were almost extinct. There were about 22 individuals left in the entire species. They were dying for a variety of reasons. They were eating lead shot and getting lead poisoning from hunting. They were eating carcasses. These are detritivores, so they were eating carcasses that had lead in them. They were getting poisoning from an herbicide called DDT, which reduced thickness of eggshells and caused chicks not to hatch. Actually a very big problem for a lot of other bird species. And lastly, they were actually alighting on power poles, and their wingspans are so large that when they would spread their wings out, they would connect the circuits and turn into big fireballs, and it would obviously kill the birds, but then they would fall down off the power pole and oftentimes would be a source of wildfires. I mean, so those 3 things, the DDT, the lead poisoning, and the electrocution, were 3 causes, and people were hunting them as well, really sadly. In the 1970s, there were fewer than 30 individuals left in the entire species. The federal government took all of them into captive breeding. The last individual was captured right here in the San Joaquin Valley near Maricopa at the Bitter Creek National Wildlife Refuge. They brought the entire species into a captive breeding program, and through a couple decades of hard work, they were able to have some, helps, incubations, and 20 years, 30, 40, 50, well, 40-ish years later, at the last count, there are just over 500 individuals. A lot of them are on Tejon Ranch. That's actually a picture of me holding a condor, big birds, right? It peed on me. It was kind of a privilege. Anyway, I digress. I'm getting geeky. You can laugh at me. Anyway, these are kind of unusual examples for the case of population ecology. Why? Because biologists know, for example, on Tejon Ranch, we know that there are about 30, really, we can get an accurate count. Last fall, there were 37 individuals on Tejon Ranch of pronghorn. We know that, okay? We know exactly how many condors there are. Over 500. If you ask the biologist who manages the condor program, she could tell you the exact number. She knows exactly how many females there are, exactly how many males there are, their age structure, their mortality rate, what they're dying from. These are all aspects of population ecology. However, these are unusual examples because we know in both of these examples exactly how many are of each species there are, of individuals there are. But population ecologists are not always that privileged to know exactly the exact numbers that they're dealing with. In fact, more often than not, they're dealing with numbers that are so huge that the best you could do is estimate. So think about a population ecologist who specializes in blackbirds, and they're trying to get an estimate of blackbirds that are in the United States. You're talking about tens of billions of birds, okay? I don't know how you would get an accurate population estimate to get an idea of age structure, mortality rate, density. That is one complex project you're talking about in the context of blackbirds, but people do it. So oftentimes, population ecologists concern themselves with estimating the population and their dynamics. And the reason why I say all this is that it's important from a population perspective to understand the dynamics of those populations from a conservation standpoint so that you can do something about them if things take a turn for the worse. The condors are the best example that I can cite. They would be extinct right now if it weren't for human intervention. They were, going extinct because of humans in the first place, but if it weren't for people realizing that, understanding their population dynamics and raising red flags, the species would have gone extinct, and it would have been extinct in the 1970s. So population ecology, that's what population ecologists do. And again, a population is a group of the same species in the same place at the same time. So demography. Demography is concerned with the age structure and the mortality, the reproductive nature of a population. Okay, and as I just said, think about the condor example. It's important to understand these things for us people so that we can know what's going on from an ecosystem perspective, from a population perspective. Okay, so we like to know things like birth rate and death rate. We like to know, what's the reproductive success of the individuals? How many individuals does a female bear within an average lifespan? How long do these individuals tend to live? What are they dying from? All of these are very important that can feed into things that population ecologists can use to work with populations. And lastly, things like environmental factors. Think about that volcano example killing all the elephants. And as I said before, here's two broad examples. The pronghorn on Tejon Ranch, we know exactly how many pronghorn there are, so we're a little bit privileged in that sense. But imagine if you're an entomologist who's studying ladybug dynamics, population dynamics. How do you get an accurate idea of the number of ladybugs in a population? Do you want to go out there and count them all? This is a grouping of ladybugs in El Paso Canyon on Tejon Ranch. Probably more than billions, trillions of ladybugs. Probably millions within an individual population. There's no way you can reasonably count the number of ladybugs in a population. It's outrageous. So the best you can do is estimate. But even estimates can be very helpful for understanding reproductive success, population survival, and so forth. So demography, it's the study of age structure, how things die, how things are born, et cetera, et cetera. Very important from a conservation perspective. So just a couple of examples. This is actually one of Darwin's finches in the Galapagos. It's a chart that looks at the percentage of the population and how old various members of that population are. So according to this data, this 2016 data, and this is real data, this particular species of Galapagos finch, it looks like most individuals within this population are 4 years old. Okay, like, almost half of the population is 4 years old. Not very many young individuals, not very many old individuals. They seem to die after about 4 years at high rates. Why? Well, who knows? It could be predation. It could be that's just their natural lifespan, whatever the case may be. From a population ecologist standpoint, it's really helpful to know, on average, how long finches live, what are they dying from, etc. Okay, that's just one example. And another example, I mean, human beings, I try to avoid human examples because humans are a little bit upsized from natural ecology for the most part, but an emerging field is actually urban ecology. So this is kind of, actually maybe not the case. I digress. We often talk about population in terms of the number of people living in a city or a county or a country. And so, I don't think human beings certainly do not subscribe to the ecological population, because we are a global species. We have developed flight and, internet and so forth. I mean, it's really hard to say that the people living here in Bakersfield are a population from an ecological perspective, right? Because you might have spouses that live in another county or another city that have different populations, right? So that's just an example of the colloquial term of population depends on what you're talking about. Anyway, I just thought I'd show that. But anyway, and then density is another aspect of population ecology aside from demography, and this is mostly concerned with the number of individuals in that population. Okay, so you can be a lucky person and work with things like California condors right here and know the exact number of individuals in a population. Or you could be a botanist, a plant ecologist, and be concerned with the population of these monolopia sunflowers right here on Tejon Ranch. Do you want to go out and count all these? I don't. As much as I love plants, I'm not interested in going out and try to count exactly how many of those are. I can estimate, and I can use a variety of different methods to estimate that, or I can just do it ocularly, whatever the case may be. Those are poppies on the back hill there. Similarly, as much as I love California poppies, I don't want to go count them all. So whether you are a privileged person who can work with specific numbers like the California condor, or another good example are the San Joaquin, or the Channel Islands kit foxes over on the Channel Islands off the coast of Santa Barbara. It's thought that there's about 2,000 on the island, which is fairly accurate. You can be privileged, or you can be dealing with things like this, or blackbirds, and it's just the numbers are way too huge to accurately get a really precise number. So the best you can do is an indirect assessment, an indirect census, by counting the number of burrows, or counting the number of birds' nests, or running transects like long ropes across this field of wildflowers and counting the number of individuals per square meter, and doing that a bunch of different times. And you can use that to indirectly estimate the number of individuals relative to the whole. Okay, so you can either do it directly or indirectly. And again, why have an understanding of the density of a population? Well, that can be hugely important for management from a conservation perspective. Okay, so we've talked about what populations are. We've talked about how they are composed, so demography and density. Last thing, I'll posit to you, that's an important aspect of population ecology, is a concept called life history. And this is important. An organism's life history is the set of traits that affect organism's success at reproduction and survival. So you can bring this to the population level, the life history of a population. A life history is the thing that affects a population's success at giving birth and living a long time and avoiding environmental stresses. It can Its life history is its success at living in really crowded environments, or using a specific food source, or resisting disease, or a life history. It's a really broad set of traits. This can be many different things that affects its success at reproduction and survival. And these traits can include the age at which an individual is first ready to give birth. Okay, so like humans, for example, or lions, can first give birth at around age 3. The frequency of reproduction, how quickly can organisms reproduce? Can it reproduce one individual per year, or thousands of individuals every week? All right, the number of offspring, and then the amount of parental care provided, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Life history is a complex phenomenon. We'll talk about that a lot more as the course goes on. But for now, I'm going to posit to you that, just ask, we will talk about this more in the ecology lecture, but let's just ask, reproductive and survival success is key to evolutionary success. And I'll try to justify that a little bit more going on. But my question to you, and this would be helpful if we were live, why don't all organisms produce large numbers of offspring? That seems like the more the merrier, right? If you want to have success as an organism, doesn't it make sense that you have massive numbers of offspring? Because that the more offspring you have, the better chances you are as a population to survive. Is that always the case? Well, maybe it is sometimes, but not always. So depending on organisms' life history, depending on a population's life history, things might vary. It's really context dependent. Okay, so for example, reproduction is expensive. It takes a lot of time for some species to go through the process of rearing young, of going through pregnancy. Any parents out there know, speaking myself as a parent, it takes a lot of time to go through the process of raising kids. A lot of energy, a lot of nutrients, a lot of money for us people. And so depending, again, I'm trying not to use human examples, but going back to plants and animals, it doesn't always make sense to have massive numbers of offspring. It really just depends. So compromise is key. So I'm going to delineate between two really broad life history patterns that exist kind of on a continuum. So these two categories that I'm about to describe to you, it's not as though every species on planet Earth falls into one of these two categories fundamentally. These are just two broad ends of the continuum that are useful for understanding the life history of life on Earth. Okay, so the first end of the life history continuum that I'm going to propose to you is what I like to call the R-selected. Some people call it the opportunistic end of the continuum. Okay, so R-selected species, R-selected populations are organisms that reach sexual maturity very fast, thus they reproduce sooner. They tend to produce massive numbers of offspring, okay, way, many thousands, millions, billions, and they have little to no parental care. Okay, so many offspring, those offspring grow up quickly and produce their own offspring very quickly, and they tend to have very, relatively small lifespans. So think about, some obvious examples are, flies are probably the most obvious example. The typical fly lives for about 24 hours, and it has anywhere on average from, 500 to 1,000 eggs in that, so it can have, imagine being born and within, this is a really weird example, but I'll correlate it to humans just because. Imagine a human being born and within 7 hours being able to have 500 babies. That's really weird, but that's what flies do. So they are definitely an R-selected species. Dandelions, another example. Ladybugs are another example. These are all R-selected, opportunistic type life history patterns. Sexual maturity fast, large number of offspring, little to no parental care, don't live very long. You can imagine if that's one end of the continuum, what's the other end of the continuum? I'm going to posit to you that that's the K-selected end, the equilibrial life history. And it's the exact opposite of what we just talked about. So these are organisms that reproduce slowly. When they're born, they're not able to have offspring right away. It takes a while for them to reach sexual maturity. Relatively few number of offspring produced, and a lot of parental care, and they tend to live a lot longer. So elephants are a good example. Gestation in elephants, I think, is on the order of 18 to 20 months. So that's just over twice as long. Human gestation is about 9 months. Takes elephants almost twice that to, from, first insemination to having a baby elephant, almost 2 years. That's a long pregnancy period. So, and elephants take, I think, a good 20, sometimes 25 years before they're even ready to have, before they're sexually mature. Okay, so they reach sexual maturity slowly. It takes a long time for them to have kids. And then babies, cute little baby elephants hang around with mama for a long time, 2-3 years before they're big enough and old enough to go out on their own for quality parental care. Us humans, of course, are another example of this. Relatively speaking, we don't have that many children. We definitely are not having hundreds. And generally speaking, it takes a lot. I'm speaking from personal experience here. It takes a lot of time and effort to raise young human babies into functioning adults. It's not for the weak-willed. Fellow parents out there hopefully will agree with me. And then I even have a plant example here. This is the carcass plant. I say that because it's the common name. It literally smells like a dead body of an animal. It's that odor that it uses to attract flies into its little stamens here that it can then use to spread pollen. That's how it reproduces. Pretty interesting. But the thing about the carcass plant is that it typically only blooms once every 100 years. And when it does bloom, it only has one seed, one big seed, like the size of a tennis ball inside. And then that one seed becomes one individual, sometimes 2 seeds, but that's kind of a mutation. And so, it's a K-selected plant. Okay. So anyway, that's it for lecture. So I've gone on. I don't know how long I've been talking. Doesn't tell me. But anyway, that's it for lecture for today, everyone. So quiz 2, as a reminder, is now live on Canvas. So please check that out. And there's 10 questions, which includes the concepts that were just covered today. It's going to be due on Monday. So in about 4 days, you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to do it. And let me know if you have any questions. You can email me or use the class question board. Other than that, I hope your first week's going well. Don't forget the variety of things, the lab assignment also due on Canvas. And other than that, yeah, I'll probably record another lecture maybe over the weekend, at the very latest on Monday. I'll try to let you know ahead of time when I'll be recording, but you'll still get the lecture recordings on Canvas anyway. And then we'll talk about lab 2 for week 2 going forward. So this is going to be the pattern, 2 lectures a week, kind of broadly revolving around Monday and Wednesday, and then a lab activity that's going to be released on Monday and you have a week to do it, and then a quiz that's going to be released on Wednesday and you have about 4 days to do it. That's going to be the broad trajectory for a typical week. Anyway, hope you're doing well. Email me and have a great rest of your evening or morning or whenever you're watching this. All right, see you later.